Hello everyone and welcome back to the second part of the REST API call from SSJS scenario. In the previous video, we have seen the basic HTTP functions under the core and the platform libraries and that we can use for the REST API calls, right? In this video, we will look at the Script.Util.HttpRequest function. Now this function is pretty simple. You just need to create an instance of the function by passing the target URL, and then you have the option to set the properties for that instance and finally send the request, right? And we can specify different operations type over here. Like you can see, you can do get, put, post, patch, delete, etc. Okay. So you can see here, like, there are multiple properties that you can set. You don't need to pass additional parameters like how we have seen in the HTTP core and the platform functions. All you need to do is once you have the object that you have instantiated, you can set the properties using the examples that you see here. For example, if you want the content handling, if you set it to 0, that means it will error out if the payload is empty. So if you don't want it to error out and continue, then you have to set it to 1. If you want to retry, if there is no if there is any error and you want to retry, you can actually specify the number of retries, continue on error. Content type you can set like an application JSON, text, HTML, etc. And then setting the header. So earlier also we saw that header we usually used to pass as the parameters. So here we have to use the function called set header. Okay, and then you have to have a separate line for every header that you want to set. So let's say I want to set authorization, then I have to set write a line for request.setHeader with that authorization and its value. And then for any other additional headers that I need to declare separately in separate lines. Okay, and then the method, what is the kind of operation that we want to perform. If it's post, we put it as post. If it's get, put, patch, delete, whatever it is, we have to specify that. And if we have a payload, then we can mention that okay, the post data is you can assign that payload to it. Now you need to ensure that the payload is in the string format. If it is not, and if it's like a JSON object or an array, you have to make sure you use the stringify function to convert it, otherwise it will give you an error. Okay, and then once you do the request.send, which is that the function that you need to invoke in order to send the request, it is the send function here. You will get the response back as a CLR object. Okay. Now it's a special type of object, and then you cannot directly interact with it unless you convert that to a string. So you have to convert that response to a string, and then you can parse it using the parse.json function. Okay, so the node that we have to look for is the response.content, and then you can change that to string, and then use parse.json for processing. Now the function can also be seen in the official Salesforce documentation. So you can see it under the content syndication functions. So you'll see Script.Util.HttpRequest, and pretty much whatever we just saw right now in the slide, the example is very similar to that. And there's a couple of additional functions that you can note as well, besides the set header and the send, you can also use the remove header function or the clear header. Okay, so these are a couple of additional functions that are also that's available. Now for a good blog to actually read would be Greg's blog here, and it is gottonington.com. So he's written a few good articles on SSJS, and specifically on Script.Util.HttpRequest. He's mentioned how to use that for REST API and what are the methods available. So this is a very good post for you to go through or refer to anytime you have any questions on, or you need some help on the syntax and all that. This is very, very useful. He's even had another blog post where he's actually mentioned how you can integrate to an external service using the REST API. And in this example also, he's actually used the Script.Util.HttpRequest as well to call an external API. Okay. Now for our example, we will use the same use case as the previous video. We will retrieve the access token, do a post request for the triggered send, and then a get request for getting details for the specific journey ID that we have. Okay, and we'll reuse most of the code that we had from our previous video, and then just slot in the Script.Util.HttpRequest code wherever we need that, wherever we need to invoke the API. Okay, so let me go ahead and add the code that we had from the previous video here. So let me just put that. So primarily we will use the same function for retrieving the access token, and as you can see, we've declared all the variables. We are using lookup rows to fetch the credentials from the data extension. Once it is found, we will assign that to the variables. We build the payload, the auth URL, the content type, and this is where we are going to add in our Script.Util.HttpRequest code here. And then in the try catch variable, as usual, we will have our JSON response variable, which will invoke the function, and we are supposed to get back the parsed response. And once we have the pass response, we can assign the access token node to our token and the REST instance URL to the REST URL variable here. Okay, and then we will output it to the screen, and then we will verify that. Okay, so let me go ahead and add the Script.Util.HttpRequest code here. So give me a second. Okay, so very similar to the example that we saw, we are using a variable called request here that is actually instantiating this, and then we can pass in the auth URL that we have built here. Okay, we will use some of the defaults that we saw in the example. The content type is going to be application JSON, which we have set here. The request method is a post request, and we have built already the payload. So as you can notice, this is a string, so we don't have to specify stringify here. I can just directly pass that as a payload, and then I'm calling the request.send, and then I can output the response.content by converting that to a string here. So if I want to look at that, I can add that here, and then I will be able to parse the JSON, and then I have to make sure that I use the string casted response.content over here before I use the parse JSON function. Otherwise it will give you an error. Okay, so I'll go ahead and comment this out, because we can just use the JSON one that we get here. We will try this out right now, so give me a second while I bring up. Let's go back to our page, do a refresh, and there you can see the integration credentials were found. We got the access token, and we also found the REST URL. Okay, so now we go back to our code here. So we can see that we were successfully able to go do a post request using Script.Util.HttpRequest and receive the access token and the REST URL as well. Okay, now we will go ahead and add in the code for the triggered send and the journey, right? So it'll be very similar to what we did last time. We will build the payload and the API route and the bearer token. So let me add that over here. Okay, so we have the payload string that we have built. The API route will be the REST URL with messaging definition sense for the triggered send. The bearer token is what we will have to be passing in the header for the authorization, right? And now we will add in our Script.Util.HttpRequest code here, very similar to how we did for the inside the function. So let me add that. Okay, so we are now instantiating this with the API route that we just had. Okay, and then the application type, we are setting it as application JSON. So here you can see, and this is something we did not do inside the function because we did not have to pass any header there. Here we have to pass the access token, right? So we have to set the header and say authorization and what is the corresponding token, right? It's the bearer token. We have to add that here. The method is post, and payload we have already had. This is the payload string that we have built, so we can put that here, and then do a request.send as is. And then whatever is the response, we will actually convert that to a string, and then we will display that here. Okay, I'll also go ahead and add the content, the details for the get request. So give me a second while I put that in. So it's easy for us to execute in one shot and then take a look at the output. Okay, so as you can see, we have specified the journey ID here. The API route, now it is changed. We are using the interactions one. Okay, and the rest of the code almost same. We are going to use the same set header, the authorization bearer token, and then we do a request. And this time note that the method has to change to get. Okay, and there is no payload for the get request. We are not sending any payload, so we can exclude that particular property from here. And then do a request.send, and then here again, once we get the response back, we will convert that to a string, and then we will output it. Okay, so I've added in these two additional Script.Util.HttpRequest sections here, one for the triggered send and one for the journey. So now let's go back to our page, refresh it, and see if we will get the output for that also. Okay, as you can see, we got a new access token, and then the response back for the post request. So you can see that we got a recipient send ID and it is queued, and then the journey by the get request, we got the for this particular ID that we specified, we got all the details as well. Okay, So hopefully by now you have a good idea on the various ways you can use SSJS for REST API calls, right? And you're not limited to calling Marketing Cloud APIs, right? You can even invoke external APIs if needed. You probably have seen Greg's blog that I mentioned earlier. And one of the use cases that I have written a blog about is if you need to send data in bulk to Salesforce, okay? So we can utilize the Script.Util.HttpRequest function along with Salesforce's bulk API. And primarily because bulk API requires multiple operations including put and patch, right? So we cannot use our regular HTTP post and get functions. So this is the article that I was mentioning. It's in tidbits for you. If you go look for the Marketing Cloud data to SFCRM using SSJS and bulk API too, I've given details of how you would be able to set up the objects and then what is the connected app that you need so that you can set it up for authentication. And on the SFMC site, you would, once you have your credentials and everything, you can see how you would use the Script.Util.HttpRequest. You have to first use a post request, and later on you have to update the specific bulk job using put and patch. Okay, so you will see put here, and then you will also see a patch request as coming in, right? So you can only do this using this Script.Util.HttpRequest. That is why it's very, very flexible. So this is one use case where you can definitely try that out, right? I hope this video was very helpful, and you shall definitely explore more now that you have some idea on how to use these functions in SSJS. Okay, thank you for watching.